Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
It's Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran again and on this New Year's Day 2015 with Dr. Christian Kopff. Dr. Kopff, thanks for joining us.
It's great to talk to you. Happy New Year to upstate New York.
And Happy New Year to you, Dr. Kopff. Dr. Kopff, looking back at 2014, what stands out most in your mind?
Well, the thing that strikes out is that things are both worse and better than I would have thought a year ago in different areas. And the things that we thought were getting better, of which race relations is probably number one, have gotten a lot worse. The things we thought were stuck in the mud, like our economy, are starting to show signs of real growth. The change in oil prices has been totally beneficial for us, and problems in the rest of the world have also been beneficial for us. We still have too many unemployed people, but all the signs are that things are slowly but surely getting better on the economic front. Now, on social issues, the opposite is true, as I've said, but I think everyone thought there would be a slow improvement over the year with the stock market taking a slight hit just for people to get money. Instead, what we see is with the oil prices thing is that which no one really saw coming, I don't think. Maybe George Soros did. That there's a real sign that our economy could be taking off in the next year and several years.
Yeah, a lot of events and trends in 2014. I don't know what stands out to you. The new one to me would be cars having to force their way through these big anti-police crowds blocking the highway.
Yes, there's a lot of sentimental affection for the 1960s when there were all these protests, and it's supposed to be so great. And the fact is, the majority of people are not interested in protests. They're interested in living their lives. But there's just enough people out there who want to protest, who are, creating a mess, and people are impatient with them. They don't have the sympathy they had 40 and 50 years ago. Get out of my way and let me live my life.
I've been watching YouTube's videos that people have taken with their phones of these anti-police protest crowds, and one of the things that you see is in places like Oregon and California, people standing on cars that are moving. And they're not moving that quickly, but unlike in the movies, these people are not able to stay on top of the cars. No, they fell off.
No, unfortunately. No, it's really great in the movies to see all these superheroes, jump on cars and hold on and on and on. But in real life, when you jump in a car and it starts moving, you fall off. Now, these people understand that, Congress can pass laws and the president can sign presidential edicts, but we can't do that with the laws of physics. The laws of physics have been given to us. Our job is to obey them. And you see this, unfortunately, in Colorado, where you see reckless skiers who don't seem to understand that if you go into a tree at 40 miles an hour, it's not like Daffy Duck, who just shakes his head and gets up and walks away. And you've seen this with these protesters. They know they can get away with breaking a lot of our laws, but they don't understand that the laws of physics is not just a good idea.
Yeah, I felt sorry for one of them. He was standing on a car, and this guy driving some big white Bronco was driving through, and people were standing on the car hood, and he just kept going, and somebody stood on the car hood. The guy fell off, and the driver ran over his foot.
That's the other disadvantage of falling off a car. You may fall underneath it. Cars are big and heavy, and Americans really do not have the attitude toward protest that they had 40 and 50 years ago. In fact, there's a recent Associated Press poll of Americans on the question of citizenship. And except for voting and volunteerism, most Americans now are much more indifferent to respecting protest, believing they have to report crimes. All the rest of that is way down for the 50 and younger generation. And a lot of Americans' attitude toward protest now is absolute impatience and even contempt and anger, because they feel they have their own lives and they don't care about the wider issue. The good news is they're indifferent to left-wing fanaticism, but the bad news is they really don't care about, the general obligations of citizenship aside from voting.
What are the other events and trends that stand out to you, Dr. Kopff, besides the obvious, the biggest one, the protest movement?
Yeah, well, in the long run, it's not clear to me. I mean, we've now had protests on both left and right over the past 8 and 6 years, and it's not clear what effect it actually has on the real life of people, whereas the changes in the market for oil and the slow increase in jobs are things that I think are going to have the largest effect. I say that granted two provisos. One is there's always something we don't predict, and two, we do know that Obamacare is going to cost a lot of lower-class, low-paid jobs, which are where most people start out, of course. You start off with a low-paying job and work your way up. So these trends, which in general are quite good, may be sabotaged over the next year if we're not lucky. The other thing that we're not looking at very much is the international scene. And one of the reasons why we're doing so well economically is the rest of the world isn't doing very well, and people are sending their money here. And you can't believe the statistics from China, but even they are admitting that they're not growing very fast, not as fast as they used to. Russia is in very serious shape because its economy depends on oil, and cutting oil prices in half means they've lost half their income in a very short period of time. So it is likely that the U.S. will be even more influential in the world, both economically and politically, over the next year, because our economy has remained stable and other people's have not.
Dr. Kopff, are there any events or issues from 2014 that'll carry into this year?
Well, of course, you're asking the question that is, as the great Yankee catcher Yogi Berra said, predictions are hard, especially about the future. And one of the things you notice is that most of the predictions made about 2014 at the beginning of the year turned out, but a few did not. No one saw the racial problems. No one saw the police problems. No one saw the price of gas sinking so incredibly dramatically. What people saw were slow growth going on. So I think the most important issue is going to be the economy is going to start overwhelming other issues in a positive sense if it continues to remain strong. Otherwise, the main issue the country now faces is we got millions of people with no jobs, not even part of the job market, not counted as part of the unemployment numbers. One reason why employment numbers are good is so many people have dropped out. And that is the biggest challenge that now faces us now that things are getting better, is getting millions of people back to work so that we get back to something like what it was like in 2006, 2007, because we are nowhere near that at this stage. However, for the first time, we're consistently moving in a positive direction, and that has not been true now for 5 or 6 years. So probably what we would hope that the trend would be that more and more Americans get back to work and are able to participate in our system. And if that happens, we're going to see a much more positive country over the course of the next year. But and that's a trend that began in 2014, where the slow improvement in the economy now has been helped considerably by the drop in oil prices.
One of the big stories from last year was the Sony hack story. Do you see that happening again and again and again, where a private corporation's emails are hacked into and private corporations are basically blackmailed? Do you see that in 2015?
Yeah, this is the world we live in now. That's not only a 2014, but the hacking and the disruption. We may also find that it becomes an element in foreign policy, where countries that otherwise would not be influential, like North Korea, or frankly even Russia, start disrupting business by hacking. On the embarrassment level, it probably is less important than we think, but it must be said, trying to, it certainly makes companies less likely to take really risky stands when they know that relatively few but highly talented people can disrupt their business and embarrass them. And there's no question that Sony was embarrassed by the things that happened. What I expect to see is that countries like North Korea and Russia and perhaps others will start using these as a part of their foreign policy to stop us from moving so far ahead of them and being so much more powerful than they are.
We're talking to Dr. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder. Our talk with Dr. Kopff continues in just a moment. Back on the Newsmaker Show, Brian O'Neill in with Dr. Christian Kopff. Your thoughts on Obama and the Cuba and Iran plan to restore diplomatic relations there?
Yeah, so these are long-term commitments of his that he's worked very hard on. In the case of Iran, it's a slow but steady process that's continuing to go on. In the case of Cuba, they had to act rapidly because Cuba is kept alive by money from the Soviet Union, and the implosion of the Russian economy is no longer the Soviet Union, but used to be the Soviet Union, now is still Russia. Russia still has that commitment from its days as the Soviet Union. And with the implosion of the Russian economy following on the drop in oil prices, Cuba was about to go under, and the communist regime probably would have fallen. And so President Obama and the Pope both worked very rapidly to do things that would prop up the communist regime in Cuba. And that is a very significant action of his, though it does reflect long-term commitments of his. And in the case of Iran, he's been working on this now his whole administration, and it now seems like it's finally coming to fruition, that there'll be a more peaceful interchange between the two countries. So what probably won't happen, however, is that Iran will stop its plan to build a nuclear weapon, because they've seen the difference between Gaddafi, who didn't have a nuclear weapon, and North Korea, that does have a nuclear weapon. And the answer is, in one case, they hate you but respect you. In the other case, they kill you as soon as they have a chance. So there's no indication the president's actions will stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I would say on the contrary. However, it will build up more normal relations. In the case of Cuba, it means we're stuck with the communist regime for a certain longer period of time, though it can't last forever.
You mentioned a moment ago Pope Francis and his efforts to keep things going in Cuba. Pope Francis, kind of an interesting phenomenon there. He is, would you say he's the most popular pope of modern times? It seems that many like him, and many who are outside the Catholic Church seem to like him a lot. And he seems to be popular with many on the left and many in the media. Do you think that he's as liberal as those on the left seem to think that he is, or are they misreporting on some of his statements? Well, what do you think the truth is there, Dr. Kopff?
Well, yes, I think it's probably a complicated answer. What I think is he is almost certainly not liberal in basic ethical and theological perspective. He's not going to move toward a married clergy. He's not going to come out in favor of limited abortion, etc. But I think he is politically a leftist, yes, and I think that he has used his influence and will use his influence to promote what are basically moderate leftist positions, although support for the communist regime in Cuba does not count as a moderate leftist position, frankly. So I think his popularity is justified. They are going to be disappointed if they think he's going to change ethical and theological.
Well, the big push will be for abortion. He did announce that he's coming out with an encyclical on climate change, which is not the kind of thing you would have seen from like a Pius XII or a Pius X or John Paul II. Not that all those popes are all the same, but this is something new for the papacy to have an encyclical on climate change. And yet, as you say, the chances of him really changing on abortion and those issues probably is not great.
Yeah, it's as close to nil as it could be. But he has consistently taken leftist positions, and this has been very positive for the press coverage. There's no question about it. A encyclical on a scientific issue like global warming is going to lead to comparisons with 17th century papacy and Galileo, which is why most popes have avoided these issues, except on the general ones of to what extent Catholics may, participate in science, which is they can and they should, but not taking particular positions on those issues. Yeah, in order to be said, John the 23rd had encyclicals which he talked about social issues of international global justice, and most popes since then have. So, they have stepped outside their purely theological area before, making statements about scientific issues, except in the general sense that the Christian religion and modern science, really are not at odds and belong together and should work together. That, of course, they have said and they should say and should continue to say. But as far as specific issues in science, science changes, and the theology of the Catholic Church does not change, and there always will be a radical difference between the two of them.
They used to talk a lot about Pope John Paul II and President Ronald Reagan and how they brought down communism. Do you think that many in the church on the conservative side will be critical historically of Pope Francis working with Obama on Cuba?
Yes, I think they will be. I think that the ones that I talk to keep reminding us that the Pope is infallible on matters of faith and morals when he officially declares that the statement is infallible and that his intervention into politics is that of any other important figure with a bully pulpit but without much power. And yes, I think it'll be viewed as the wrong thing to have done, because it was accompanied with no concessions by Cuba in any area involving either religious freedom, economic freedom, or freedom of speech. And Raul Castro was very clear on that when he made the statement, that it was the United States that was making the concessions, and it was done with the cooperation of the Bishop of Rome, and that it was not, they were making no concessions. And I think people already think, and will come to think even more, that this was a serious mistake, that there needed to be concessions. If we were going to give up on things to prop up their regime, they needed to make concessions too.
We've been talking with Dr. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder. Dr. Kopff, any final thoughts before we go?
My final thought, looking back over the years, this year Shirley Temple and Mickey Rooney passed away. We should remember that once upon a time, two wonderful, talented young people, a child and a teenager, were the biggest stars in America and made wonderful family movies. And many of us still watch them, in fact, on television around Christmas time. And we should honor their memory this year.
Absolutely. What's your favorite Mickey Rooney movie?
I am very impressed by what he did in National Velvet. Of course, it's a great Elizabeth Taylor movie. It's a great Anne Revere movie. You can go down all the other great actors, but he just blows me. Every time I see that movie, I am touched and impressed.
I feel the need to ask you, out of the journalistic standard of balance, your favorite Shirley Temple movie.
I love Heidi. I think that was the most purely successful Shirley Temple movie. It's not the one where she dances and sings the most. Then you'd want The Little Princess, or you'd want The Littlest Rebel, or one of those, which are also fun movies. But I think just as a film, Heidi is the most nearly perfect one they made.
Dr. Christian Kopff, wishing you a Happy New Year, and thanks for joining us.
Happy New Year to you and to upstate New York.